I think it's interesting that you think that a magazine writer lied the American people into war.
Well, he encouraged it. He wrote stories that were dishonest.
He wrote a story about the gassing of the Kurds in I forget if it was the Atlantic or the New Yorker, but I'm actually referring to John Kelly talking to the New York Times.
He wrote stories, by the way, where he took what intelligence officials in the American Pentagon bureaucracy said and wrote it as the gospel truth. And this highlights the entire point that I'm making about Trump's foreign policy, is this is a guy who wants to use American troops sparingly. He wants peace through strength. It's why his foreign policy was so successful during his first term. It's all the same people who were wrong about Iraq. They were wrong about the quagmire in Afghanistan. They were wrong about Syria. They were wrong about everything. And now they're coming after Donald Trump because he actually has a realistic and cautious foreign policy.
I'm talking about people who worked for Donald Trump in his first administration. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about not just John Kelly, but Mark Milley, who was the Trump-appointed chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Who disobeyed Trump's direct orders on troop redeployments in Syria.
And I'm talking about the guy that had your job.
A massive violation of his constitutional oath, by the way.
I'm talking about the guy that had your job before Donald Trump's supportive crowd wanted to hang him, Vice President Mike Pence, who said, as you know, that Trump put himself before the Constitution. I'm talking about General Mattis, also Secretary of Defense in Trump's administration. I'm talking about Mark Esper, the Secretary of Defense, who told me that Trump does have fascistic tendencies. John Bolton, H.R. McMaster, Alyssa Farah-Griffin.
Okay, Jake,
these are Trump administration officials.
Listen to every Trump administration official? You know, one reason why Kamala Harris doesn't have as many people criticizing her is because she doesn't fire people who fail. That's why we haven't had a real audit of the disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal, is because Kamala Harris protects failures in government. Donald Trump fires them. And I'd much rather have the president who fires people who screw up. Now, Jake, no, this is an important point.
Kamala Harris. He did not fire Mike Pence.
Kamala Harris.
He did not fire Mark Milley.
Kamala Harris.
He did not fire John.
He fired a lot of those people, Jake, and he did because they weren't doing their job. But this is the thing, Jake. We've now spent 5 minutes talking about people in Donald Trump's staff
who think he's not fit for office.
Who he fired.
Who think he's not fit for office.
Oh, they didn't think he was unfit for office until they had a falling out with him because he fired them. And we're not talking about the public policy.
Well,
we're actually talk about how Americans can't afford groceries.
We're actually
Can we talk about the fact that Americans can't afford the cost of housing? Can we talk about the fact that a lot of people out there in Erie, Pennsylvania, they're the ones who suffer and die when people like Mark Esper and Mark Milley don't obey the commander-in-chief's orders.
We're talking about Donald Trump and what he says.
Yes.
And Donald Trump says...
And you'd much rather talk about what Donald Trump allegedly said than what Donald Trump did in office. I'm talking about
what he
did in office, Jake,
what he said publicly.
1.5%
he wants to use
inflation.
The military to go after the enemy within, which is the American people.
He did not say that, Jake.
The enemy within?
He said that he was going to send the military after the American people. Show me the quote where he said that.
He said the enemy within.
He said far-left lunatics. He's talking about people rioting.
And Schiff.
He's talking about people rioting after the election. I think
the Pelosi's were rioting after the election?
He said...
Adam Schiff was rioting after the election?
You're using two separate phrases. He said about using the military that far-left lunatics, people who riot in the wake of an election, people who burn down American cities in the summer of 2020, yes, we should have a federal law enforcement
This is what he said to Joe Rogan on Friday. The enemy within that he wants the military to go after.
No, this is
the enemy within, a bigger problem than Kim Jong-un.
The second part.
We have people that are really bad people that I really think want to make this country unsuccessful. That's who the enemy within.
And did he say that he wants to use the military against those people? Here's the game.
Use the military to go after the enemy within.
Here's the game that you're playing. He said
I'm not playing a game.
No. Can I answer the question, please? He said that he wanted to use the military to go after far-left lunatics who are rioting, and he also called them the enemy within. He separately, in a totally different context, in a totally different conversation, said that Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff were threats to this country.
Were the enemy within.
Were
the enemy within. He said they were the enemy within.
So every time he uses the exact same phrase, we assume that he uses
I don't know. I don't throw around the term of enemy within to talk about using the military against destroying American people.
And you're asking his vice president, but you won't let me answer the question. I'm telling you that Donald Trump has said, and I agree with him, that we should use the U.S. military to go after
Americans.
People who riot, who burn down our cities.
And this was what John Kelly was.
The National Guard.
This was what John Kelly was alarmed by, the idea of using the U.S. military to go after Americans.
He's
That's
not
what he said.
Donald Trump never said Americans writ large. You keep on putting words in his mouth and my
Are they or
mouth.
are they not Americans?
Far left people who commit acts of violence, who riot. And
Now
I
you're
don't
doing
care.
a very narrow definition of
I
what he said,
don't-
which is
I
not what
don't
he said.
care.
That's not what he said. But let me
He
ask you.
did.
Let me ask you the bigger
He did
question.
say that, Jake. He did. He said that he wanted to use the U.S. military. Let me clarify.
Go after far left lunatics, yes. And then he
go
also
after
added
people who were rioting
he asked-
and looting.
and
he
added,
never said.
he added
he
Schiff,
never said.
and then he added the Pelosi's.
He never. He
and then
said
he added people that don't want the
that
country
Adam
to succeed.
Schiff, he said that Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi he used in a separate context and a separate conversation. And what you're doing is you're smashing two
Fox
totally
asked him
different
about
conversations.
Fox asked him about this last week, and he didn't take issue with it. He said the enemy within is the biggest
But did
threat
he
to
say
this
the
country.
enemy within that he's going to use the military against Nancy Pelosi? Donald Trump offered Nancy Pelosi the National Guard on January the 6th, and according to private
Oh,
emails,
boy.
she